How's it going, everyone? It is I, Anime Outlet, and this is What If Deku Had Water Breathing, the movie. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. And now, let's begin. The screams and cries of a baby echo throughout a mountaintop. As we zoom in, we end up finding Izuku being born to his mother, Inko, as their house is located on the top of a mountain with the rest of their family. As we now end up cutting forward 4 years, we see a young Izuku running around the halls of their house, waving around an All Might action figure, waving it around excitedly as if All Might was flying, about to go and fight another villain. As Izuku would be doing this, his mother would end up walking over to him before asking him to calm down. "Izuku, let's go see what your quirk's going to be," she would say, smiling down towards the young child. Izuku excitedly would pump his fist into the air. "Yeah! I can't wait to see what my quirk's going to be," he would yell, as he would then rush over towards where his mother was getting his boots, where she would then put him on to Izuku. It had just rained the night before, and the mountain was extremely muddy, so the journey down it towards the doctor would be just around 2 hours long. As they would end up departing, they would slowly walk down the mountain, as they would finally reach the bottom 2 hours later at just around 9 a.m. at the exact time the doctor's office would open. As they'd be walking in, they'd be the first to arrive, as the doctor would then greet them. "Hello, Mrs. Inko and Izuku," the doctor would say, before hurriedly pushing them into a private room. "So I hear you are to take a quirk test, are we? Well, let's find out what kind of quirk young Izuku here is going to have," the doctor would say before taking a blood sample, going back to the lab. 5 minutes later, the doctor would return with a sorrowful face. "Look, how do I say this? I'm sorry, Inko and Izuku, but Izuku here, he's quirkless." "What?" Inko would say, as the doctor would only just nod his head. "Yeah, he's quirkless. Or, actually, he could have a late blooming quirk, meaning he's not going to have his quirk unlocked just yet. Or, of course, he could just end up having a quirk. It's just what we look for in the blood is absent, meaning it's a rare genetic thing to have a quirk and to be missing this vital component. And he's missing that component. So, really, now it's basically just waiting to see what's going to happen." As we end up cutting forward to see Izuku walking down up the path of the mountain with a glooming face. He was very sad, after all, as the one thing he'd been looking forward to for so many years had just been ripped away from him. And Izuku didn't know why. Why was this happening to him? Why did he not have a quirk? All of these questions wouldn't be able to be explained. However, after the 2-hour walk being up, Izuku would go to his room to look at all of his All Might action figures that had been handcrafted out of wood by his own mother. As Inko would end up walking into the main hall of the family house. "Ah, if it isn't my daughter Inko," her father would say. "So, what's the boy's quirk?" "He's quirkless," Inko would say, as Inko's father would then smile. "Perfect. Let's set him up for training right away," her father would say, as Inko would then nod her head, going over, grabbing Izuku out of his room before telling him, "We're gonna help you train to become a hero, Izuku," with an excited face, as Izuku would look up to her with shining eyes, as if saying, "Really?" As Inko would only just nod her head. "Yup, just follow me," she would explain, bringing Izuku towards the main room. "If it isn't my grandson, Izuku. How are you?" "I'm good. I'm Good grandpa, Izuku would say, as Izuku's grandpa would only just laugh. Alright, well, I'm gonna help you become a hero, alright? I'm going to be teaching you the very ancient technique that is known as water breathing. But to do this, you're gonna have to start training before I end up teaching you any cool moves. So, your mother will be training you in the arts of katana wielding, while you yourself is going to figure out how to get your stamina and lung capacity up higher. So, Izuku, are you up for the task? Izuku would excitedly nod his head. Yes, I am, he would say, shaking up and down. Well, then your first training exercise is to run down the mountain and then up the mountain every single day. After a year of doing this, I'll give you a new training task. Once you are 10 years old, I'll start training you in the use of water breathing. Good luck, Izuku, his grandfather would say, as Izuku would then just walk back to his room, excitedly waiting for the next day to begin his training. As Izuku would be zooming around his All Might figure in his bed until he would slowly cast away into the adventures of sleep. And once Izuku was there, he would jolt up right as the clock struck 9 a.m. He would put on his running shoes before running down the mountain, being careful not to trip, running down as the once 2-hour walk turned into about a 1-hour run. As Izuku ran half of it while also walking half of it. As you got to remember, Izuku is only 4 years old. He's not that old, so he's not going to be able to do this. And most 4-year-olds couldn't run for 2 hours straight. So as Izuku made it down to the bottom, he would fall back, falling asleep for an hour before running back up the mountain, which would take him an hour and 30 minutes as he was still quite tired. Once he would get back up there, his mother would end up just meeting him right at the top of the mountain before taking him to start just learning how to wield a katana, as she would teach him the basic slash and all of that, just learning how to use it just in a good manner and be able to slash right in places and to the point that you could get a clean cut even if it wasn't a very strong slash. So with all of that out of the way, a year would end up passing of Izuku running down and then back up the mountain, to the point Izuku could run all the way down and all the way back up without stopping at the age of 5. Izuku's stamina was insane at his level, something that many athletes don't have, as Izuku had started training from a young age, and the thin air up at the top of the mountain allowed for Izuku to start his lungs just early, and this would cause Izuku to be able to breathe more just from less air. So when he had normal full air, Izuku would have to breathe less, causing him to need less energy to continue going. It's quite complicated. So once Izuku would make it back to the top after a full year, his mother would be standing there with his grandfather, as his grandfather would then take out a gourd before tossing it over towards Izuku. Alright, Izuku, your next task is to keep on running up and down and up the mountain every single day, while also blowing into this for at least 30 minutes straight every single day. It's okay if you take breaks. Your end goal is to end up shattering it, alright? So 30 minutes every day, just continuous, no 1 minute breaks, only like around 30 seconds. If you have a 1 minute break, that would just be too much. Izuku would nod his head and would be eager to continue on this training, as he would end up blowing into at first this tiny gourd, which after around a month Izuku would end up shattering, and after that his grandfather would give him a massive gourd that would take forever for Izuku to be able to shatter. So after another year, Izuku still couldn't shatter it, but his lungs were getting even more, so his grandfather made him run up and down, so 2 mountains every single day. This was a lot on the young child, as he was only 6 years old, but his hopes and dreams of becoming a hero far outweighed anything like that. Every time he was in pain, not wanting to continue, Izuku just thought, of the time that doctor said he was corkless, the time the doctor said he wasn't going to have a cork, and the hope that he could one day be a hero drove Izuku to the extent to continue on just pounding the stone, continue grinding, hoping one day he would be able to become a hero. This would lead to Izuku becoming a prodigy. His work ethic was insane. Every single day Izuku would be running, lifting weights. He'd be doing all of this just to get stronger, just to become a hero. So, as Izuku turned 10 years old, he was excitedly jumping around, having been training with his katana skills, as his grandfather would finally wield him ready to learn how to use water breathing. As his grandfather would end up grabbing a katana out of one of the katana racks, as he would end up flowing it in the air before end up getting a deep breath. He would breathe in and then out, or he would end up saying first form, water surface slash, before slashing his katana, as Izuku would stare on, just watching it, as what looked like water would flow out of his sword as somewhat of a visual effect, as the slash was easily clean. As Izuku would stare on, before taking the sword from his grandfather, he would breathe in and out. He would do that multiple times before lifting the sword into the air, running forward, before saying first form, water surface slash, and slashing with the sword, causing for a clean slash as his father would be nodding in approval while smiling. Good, Izuku. Good. That's going to be enough for today. I know it wasn't very long. Just keep practicing that over and over again. Alright? Tomorrow, we'll learn the second form, water wheel. Izuku would nod his head, as he would then go out into the courtyard where many dummies were set up for Izuku, as he would end up rushing towards them, breathing in before saying first form water surface slash and slashing them cleanly in half. As the day would end up passing, full of Izuku training, as finally once the day would pass and the next day would come, Izuku would walk into his grandfather's room, where his grandfather would be standing there with a katana. Alright, Izuku, this one's gonna have to be taken outside, alright? So, here's water wheel. Second form, water wheel, he would say, jumping up into the air, raising his sword above him, before spinning in a circle, slashing everything in front of him. Izuku would watch this before jumping in the air, saying water wheel before end up falling flat on his face. He didn't get it the first try like the surface slash, as his grandfather would show him it 3 more times. However, Izuku still couldn't get it. Finally, Izuku, now mad, pissed off that he couldn't do it, would end up cracking his knuckles, breathing in a very deep breath, jumping into the air. Second form, water wheel, he would yell, spinning, doing multiple flips, spinning at such high capacity, causing a crater to be formed in the ground after his katana had made contact with it. His grandfather would look at him with just happiness. Good, Izuku, good. We now end up cutting forward to see Izuku walking into middle school. He was homeschooled for all of elementary school, but now that it was middle school, he couldn't be homeschooled any longer. So as Izuku would end up walking in as the ripped middle schooler he was, would end up walking in before walking to his classes, just sitting down. It was quite the new experience to him, however, Izuku honestly didn't care too much. So as the day would end up passing, Izuku would be sitting on the swings, just taking a break, taking it all in from all the things he had done that previous day. So when I go to do the water wheel, gotta jump high in the air, and I gotta front flip. Yes, that's right. Izuku would be talking to himself, when all of a sudden he would end up hearing someone yell, "Hey, stop it!" A voice would say, as Izuku would turn his attention and head towards wherever he heard, where Izuku would end up seeing a young blonde-haired boy pushing down a girl. Right as the girl was about to get up and to defend herself, Izuku stepped in before punching Bakugo right across the face. as this blonde-haired boy, now known as Bakugo, would get up with an angry look on his face. "Who did that?" he would yell, rubbing the dirt out of his eyes. "Such a disgrace," Zuko would say, looking down towards Bakugo. "What's the point of this? Why are you pushing down this girl?" Zuko would say. So Bakugo would only look towards Zuko before rushing at him with sparks flying out of his hand. However, before Bakugo could even do anything, Zuko would grab Bakugo's wrist, turning it violently before putting Bakugo down on his back with his hand just pinned down to his back, pinning Bakugo down. "Stop already. You have no chance at winning," Izuku would say, as Bakugo would end up being let go by Izuku before rushing off, meeting up with some of his lackeys who would end up just rocking off, mumbling something to themselves about some stupid idiot that was the green-haired boy. Izuku would stare down towards the girl before offering her hand. "Hi, I'm Izuku," he would say. "Oh, I'm Shinobu," the girl would say, as Izuku would end up smiling down towards her. "It's nice to meet you." We start this what-if off with a 5-year time skip as Izuku and Shinobu both enhance their relationship, becoming very good friends. And Izuku, now being 15, would have learned most of the forms of water breathing from his grandfather. And so with Izuku now having learned the first through right about the 9th or 10th form, Izuku would be very, very strong. Now, Shinobu, on the other hand, would also have a breathing style. This would, of course, be insect breathing, like she does have in the anime. So, Izuku and Shinobu would both grow up wanting to be heroes together. And, of course, their friendship would only enhance as they would both vow to end up making it into UA together. And so, the day would finally come of the UA entrance exam. They were both very excited. They couldn't wait to begin their hero journeys, as they had both worked so hard for it, and they weren't about to let this opportunity slip away from their hands. As most people in life only have one opportunity to do what they want to do, and as soon as that opportunity flies by, there's not going to be another opportunity for them. So they want to take advantage of this opportunity and make the most of it. So as both of them would walk in through the arches of UA, they would both admire the school very well, just staring at all the beauty of the campus. As they would then end up rounding a corner, they would end up finding the auditorium where all the written exams would be held. Izuku would walk in sitting down as he would end up being handed a paper where he would end up taking the written exam test. Izuku, although being trained mostly in physical ways, Izuku was quite smart mentally as well. He was a very intelligent child, as his parents knew that a good fighter isn't just physically gifted, they are also mentally gifted. And so Izuku would of course be insanely smart, even basically up to the likes of Momo Yaoyorozu, as Izuku was in all of the gifted classes as a child in middle school. Of course, he had to test into these since he was a new kid, not having been in the school just through elementary school, having joined in middle school. So Izuku would end up sitting down, taking the test, and finishing it with ease before he would end up being told to just sit and wait as everyone else would finish. Once everyone would finish, Izuku would be sitting or wondering what was going to happen, as finally a teacher would end up coming in. "Good morning, UA examinees. It's now time for the Hero Course exam. So if you're not a part of the Hero Course, you may now leave," he would say, as everyone who would not be testing into the Hero Course would end up leaving the premises. So after that, President Mike would then explain what the exam was going to be, how there was going to be 3 different types of robots, well, actually 4, a 1, 2, 3, and 0 pointer, as those were the robots that were going to be just causing them to just be held back. They have to destroy these, but the zero pointer is going to be holding them back from this, as it was merely just a distraction to hopefully catch some kids off guard. So as Izuku would end up lining up, you would end up finding out that Shinobu was in his just part of the exam place as well, as she was in his testing city too. Izuku, seeing this, would walk over to her, greeting her, before asking if she wanted to work together, which of course they would say yes. They had trained together for many years, and so they of course have worked many just skills working together. So with that, they would end up running into the exam as soon as the doors opened, as would end up finding tons of these one-pointers all in a group, as both of them would strike down half of them with ease, each taking out their sword, slashing them all down, as both of them actually had to write into UA to get their swords approved, saying that their sword is a catalyst for their quirk, and without the sword, they really aren't able to use their quirk to their fullest extent. Now, it's not like an enhancer, rather, whereas one like that would basically have an enhancer on them, allowing for their quirk to be enhanced over their base ability. However, with the sword, it draws out that base ability and shows it more fully. However, if Izuku had to use his hand to perform the moves, it wouldn't be as effective and wouldn't show the true extent of Izuku's power. So, with them using their swords, they would slash down all of the robots in front of them before they would end up rushing forward, as Izuku would jump off of a wall before going headfirst right in to a massive three-pointer army, as Izuku would then lift his sword above his head as he was flying towards them. Second form, water wheel, Izuku would say, spinning in a rapid motion, slicing through the middle of the robot army. As all of the robots would turn to see this mass destruction, Shinobu would then appear, slashing each of them down with a clean strike to the head. As all the three-pointers falling down to the ground, would then say, "Alright, we should probably now just try to show our own abilities instead of working together. I'll see you after the test," Izuku would say, as would say, "Alright, I'll see you after the test, Izuku," as they would then both split up, going their separate ways for the test. After this, Izuku would rush through, easily slicing through many more robots, sometimes using water surface slash, the first form, just slashing a clean strike, causing for an entire row in front of robots to be destroyed. As Izuku would continue slashing them all down, all of a sudden a massive zero-pointer would start to shake the ground beneath Izuku's feet. As Izuku would end up looking up, he would see the zero-pointer rushing towards where Izuku was, seeing as the zero-pointer would see all of its fallen comrades as the robots. It would want to get revenge on Izuku, as it was an intelligent mind just built by some of the support corps seniors. So Izuku, seeing this robot rush towards them, Izuku would get his sword in front of him, getting in a deep breath. As Izuku would breathe in and then out, he would stare up at the zero-pointer coming towards him, as Izuku would and jump up, saying sixth form, whirlpool, twisting his body in a rapid motion, creating a whirlpool of air, as he would then cut the zero-pointer and be sucked into it, as the zero-pointer's armor and plating would start to get rapidly cut around it, exposing many wires. Izuku would fall back to the ground, seeing the zero-pointer damaged. However, it would continue its attack, rushing towards him. As Izuku, seeing the zero-pointer do this, would end up staring on towards it, and before jumping up, first form, water surface slash, Izuku would say, slashing his sword, causing many of these wires to get cut and split open. Yes, the zero-pointer was designed by a bunch of support corps seniors, but it was also designed to be able to be easily taken down, so it wouldn't hurt any of the students if it just kept on going. There was also a strategically placed off switch in Nesu's office, as he would be watching the exams. So with that, Izuku slicing through the wires would cause the zero pointer to shut down, not able to do anything else, as the wires that had just been connecting its entire body were right in the chest, which happened to be the biggest part or most damage by Izuku's whirlpool. So after that, Izuku would fall back to the ground before he would hear over the intercoms that just the test was over. After this, Izuku would end up standing up out after sitting down, just breathing in and out after using so much forms, just in such like a 20-second time limit. It was quite rough on Izuku's body, however it wasn't as rough as some of the other prior trainings he had done. As Izuku would be walking out, he would meet up with Shinobu right outside of UA, where he would then ask her how she thought she did. "I think I did quite well," she would answer. Izuku would just nod his head. "That's good," he would say, as Shinobu would so nod her head in agreement. "Yes, that is quite good." As they would both be walking back to their houses, both of them would walk under an underpass, where all of a sudden a sewer drain would explode up out of nowhere. As Izuku would end up seeing this, the sewer drain would then have sludge oozing out of it. Izuku would be staring at it, would yell for Shinobu to get back, however it was far too late, as a massive sludge billow would ooze out of the sewer before exploding out, capturing Shinobu in its grasp, as it would start spewing sludge right into Shinobu's mouth, trying to take hold of her. As Izuku would be watching this, he would immediately jump into action, grabbing out his sword. However, Shinobu was placed inside the sludge in such a position, if Izuku were to slash using surface slash, then Izuku was going to cut her. However, that would be if he did horizontally. As Izuku would hold his sword, he would lift it up in a vertical position before saying first form, water surface slash, before slashing down vertically in a different type of way. He would slash down vertically instead of the normal horizontally. Slashing down, half of the sludge would end up falling off to the side of its body. However, this wasn't like if Izuku cut off the arm of something. The sludge would just come back and combine. As Izuku would see the combining, to end up wondering how he was going to take care of this thing. As Izuku would see this still holding his sword in his hand, he would end up seeing the pleading eyes of Shinobu right there, pleading with him to do something. Izuku would end up jumping forward, staring at one of the only physical things on the sludge villain, thinking, what if the eyes? What if that's how I kill it? Izuku would think to himself, as Izuku would jump forward with his sword in hand. However, the sludge villain would go to attack him with the side of his sword. As Izuku would dodge, his sword side would be down below. With Izuku seeing this, he would have his arm out, jumping forward, grasping both of sludge villain's eyes, ripping it out of the sludge. So the sludge villain would end up screaming in pain and agony, as that was just the brain part. Every organ was located inside the eye because there was no other physical ability. And so, because of that, Izuku grabbing them, pulling them away from its body, would cause the sludge villain immense pain, as all of the sludge villain would then lose all of its ooze-like consistencies, rather turning into a watery type, as the sludge would then drain, as Shinobu would be left on the ground, coughing up all of the sludgy water out of her system. All Might would then jump out of the same sewer drain, looking around, wondering what was happening, as would end up seeing All Might there. Would just say, "Oh, hello, All Might," Izuku would say in a rather calm voice, which threw off All Might. "Oh, hello, young boy and girl, do you happen to know where, a sludge villain might have gone?" As All Might would then turn his attention towards the girl, who happened to still be on the ground, coughing out some of the sludge. As All Might would walk over to her, patting her on the back, he would ask her what was wrong, as she would only point to Izuku, who had the eyeballs of the sludge villain in his hand. "Yeah, that sludge villain took a hold of her. I had to take care of it so it didn't kill her," Izuku would say, tossing the eyeballs over to All Might. As All Might would end up catching them, he would look down in his hands, seeing the sludge villain's eyes, before he would end up tossing them on the ground, stepping on them. Well, I guess that takes care of the sludge villain. Thanks, kid, he would say before jumping off. Sasuke would only look up towards the faintly shadow of All Might. Well, that was kind of cool, Sasuke would say, before walking over to Shinobu, offering her a hand, pulling her up, as they would then both continue on their walk towards the house that they happened to live in. As both of them had lived up in the mountains, however, Shinobu lived around a couple just miles away from Suku, just around 5 miles. So the walk wouldn't be really too hard, as if Izuku averaged a 10-minute mile, which was nothing for him. It was basically a light jog. Izuku could get there in 50 minutes. And with that, they would both just walk back to their house, with Shinobu going to Izuku's house for dinner, just to celebrate, hopefully making it into a UA. However, someone would look on behind the shadows of some of the trees, staring on towards the two walking up the mountains. With an evil expression on their face, they would smile, knowing what was about to happen. As Bakugo would be smiling on towards Shinobu and Izuku, all of a sudden Izuku would sense something as he would look back right in the direction that Bakugo was in. Quickly, Bakugo would duck under a branch, as Izuku would just shrug it off, thinking that it was nothing, continuing to walk up the 2-mile hike that was his house's driveway. So as Izuku would walk up, he would end up reaching his house before he would end up walking in, where he would be greeted by his mother, as she would then greet Shinobu along with Izuku before quickly hurrying them into the dinner room, where his grandfather would be awaiting them, as he would just say, "Think of this as an early congratulations for making it to UA. I have full confidence in you making it. Congratulations, Izuku," his grandfather would say, with Izuku smiling. "Thanks, Granddad," he would say, as his grandfather would only nod his head. The family would then dig into their meal as the night would come to an end. As dinner ended, Izuku would ask to walk Shinobu home, which his family would of course agree to. As they would end up leaving Izuku's house, they would end up walking down a path where Izuku would continue this walk for 5 straight miles. However, a burning sensation would go in throughout Izuku's nose. It smelt exactly like smoke. As Izuku would smell this, he would look up into the sky, seeing a huge black burning cloud of smoke funneling into the upper atmosphere. As Izuku would see this, seeing the clouds all around it and seeing everything was playing out, Izuku would end up running along with Shinobu running ahead, as this was her own house after all. Shinobu would quickly end up running before end up making it onto her own property, where she would end up seeing her house up in flames with a single silhouette inside. She would end up rushing forward. She would end up catching a glimpse of this face's silhouette. It was a deep burning smile written onto the face of one of the people that Izuku and her had resented most, Bakugo Katsuki. He was one who had an insanely powerful quirk. However, his ego had caused many to be drawn away from them, especially with Izuku and Shinobu around to always protect everyone. And so Bakugo Katsuki ended up becoming an outcast among the school because of his such high ego and thinking he could beat everyone, and everyone was just dumber than him. It caused everyone to have sort of a villain persona associated with him, and now Bakugo's buying into that persona. He truly was becoming a villain like everyone had suspected he would be. This would be happening, Bakugo would disappear back into the flames before disappearing all entirely. As Shinobu would end up trying to rush in, Izuku would end up stopping her, shaking her head as they would then look upon the burning flames. There was no screams. It was oddly silent. All they could hear was the burning flames and the wood just crackling under the immense heat. Izuku would shake his head another time. "It's no use. They would be screaming right now if they were still alive. I'm sorry, Asuka would say with a cold, stoned voice, as Shinobu only just stare on towards him with tears in her eyes. She would end up reaching out her hands, hugging Asuka tightly, crying onto his shoulder. She couldn't believe it. Her own family is dead. As Asuka would stay there until the morning with her, watching on as the flames would burn throughout the night. In the morning, when the flames would subside, Asuka would walk among the wreckage, looking for any sort of ash or bone that may still linger. As Asuka would be looking around, he would end up finding several skull fragments scattered throughout the household, with Asuka picking some of them up, putting them in his hands before crushing them, getting out one of the pots he had in his bag. As Asuka, carrying one of these pots for an unknown reason, would end up grabbing it, putting down those things into it. After Asuka put the bones inside the jar and the crushed fragments inside there as well, Asuka would hand it over to Shinobu. This is what I found, that's the rest of them. I'm sorry that your parents had to go out like this, Asuka would say towards her, as she would only shake her head. It's fine, Asuka. There's no use to being sad right now. Should rather just be happy that they lived. Although it is quite a sad fate to go out like this. Indeed it is, Asuka would answer. Asuka and Shinobu would face a calm walk back to Izuku's house. It was a calm one, however, it was very silent. The two were in a mix of emotions, especially Shinobu. She had just seen the death of her parents, and she honestly didn't know what to think of it. She could have saved them in her mind, but Izuku had told her not to go in, as it's best just to not go and do that, with Izuku also telling her and reminding her, if they were still alive, wouldn't you hear the screams of them? Izuku would have told her this, and Shinobu would have nodded her head, agreeing with it. It was a true statement, after all. If they were alive, they would have still been screaming to death, signifying that they still could have been saved. So as they would end up returning, his mother would end up rushing towards the door, yelling at Izuku, wondering where he was, which Izuku would then put his hand up, asking for his mother to stop speaking. Shinobu's parents, they died, Izuku would say, as his mother would instantly stop all of this before turning her attention towards Shinobu. Oh, what, really? She would end up saying, oh, I'm so sorry for you. Oh my gosh, she would end up saying, as before his mother would then end up telling her that she can stay there as long as she would like. We'd cut forward 2 weeks to see that Izuku would end up having a letter in the mail. As Izuku would end up receiving this letter, he would stare on at it, opening it up before it would end up saying that Izuku had passed the entrance exam. Shortly thereafter, another letter would end up appearing, this time being hand-delivered by one of the teachers. Yeah, when we went to the address, we just found some sort of ruins, so I decided to come here. You and Shinobu look like quite the team, so I suspect you know her pretty well. So please give this to her, one of the teachers would say, with Izuku nodding his head. Going inside, giving the letter to Shinobu, who would then promptly open it, seeing that she had also made UA. She would smile before tears would start draining out of her eyes as she would stare up towards the sky, as if just telling her parents that she made it. She was now a member at UA, and she couldn't believe it. As tears of sadness turned into joy, as Izuku would pat her on the back. We cut forward another week to see Izuku and Shinobu both walking to school together. As they would end up walking to school, end up walking inside, finding their classroom and sitting down before just staring up at the board. They had both left extremely early because of how long the walk was, so they were extremely late, just underestimating how good their walking speed happened to be. So with them sitting there for an hour or more, finally some of their other classmates would end up walking into class. As all of their classmates would end up walking And finally, a yellow inchworm-looking thing would slowly inch its way up to the front of the classroom. "Good morning, class," the person would say, with Izuku recognizing this person as the one who had given him his letter of acceptance. "Today we are going to be doing a short little exercise. We are going to be going out to a small place just to learn what it means to be a hero. It's kind of a small field trip, but it is on campus after all. It's your first day of UA, so don't really sweat about it, alright?" It would say, as everyone would nod their head, where they would end up traveling down to a small complex of dome-shaped buildings. Where they would then walk in, it would be the Museum of Heroes, located on the UA campus. As all of them would walk in, admiring the museum, it was about 1/3 of the size of the USJ for any comparison. It was still insanely massive, it just wasn't as big as something like the USJ. As all of them would be staring on at the marvels of this place, end up walking it through before they would end up meeting their hero teacher. "Hello, class," a striking voice would say, this, of course, being All Might. As All Might up saying this, Zuko would look up to him, as All Might would then just realize who these two were in his class, realizing that Shinobu and Izuku both were the people that he had seen who had managed to stop the sludge villain. "So, today I'm going to be teaching you all about the history of heroes and what it means to truly be a hero. Now, your motive to be a hero should relatively be similar, and that is to save as many people as possible. You see, as heroes, we want to do our very best to save as many civilians and innocent lives as possible, as we don't want to have too many people just to die." As All Might would end up continuing his conversation, and once it would end, he would end up allowing for all of the students to end up just wandering off. However, once it would end up wandering off, Zuko would stare up at everything before just grip would end up being held around Zuko's neck. This would be forcefully pulled into a portal, as Zuko would now be standing right in front of a blonde-haired boy. "Good morning, Izuku. It's nice to meet you again. Bakugo, what is the meaning of this? What the hell did Shinobu do to you?" Zuko would say with a fierce voice, staring on towards Bakugo. However, Bakugo didn't answer anything, only smiling with the same smile that was so sadistic through the fire of Shinobu's parents' house. As Zuko would be staring at Bakugo, he would only burst into an idiotic laughter. "Oh, that was only the first part of my plan. You see, I'm going to eliminate you, and then I'm going to eliminate Shinobu. She's already weak from the death of her parents. So, taking out you is going to be the hard part. But once I take out you, she'll be a cakewalk." Bakugo would say, Zuko end up reaching for his katana, but realizing it wasn't with him right now. He had left it at his house for some reason, and so had Shinobu, both of them having forgot it. As this just unlucky moment, Zuko reaching down, Bakugo would end up smiling. "Looking for this? You may be thinking you forgot it, but no. I actually got it from you. You went through the portal. It's a shame it's gonna be like when you went through the portal, I managed to steal it from you. So now you're not gonna be able to use it in our fight," Bakugo would say, throwing it up into the air. "You see, back when I was still prideful, and having not been beaten by you 1,000,000,000 times, I would have wanted a fair fight, because I thought I could beat you fair and square. But that's simply not gonna cut it now, Lit. So in order to dumb things down, I need you to be at your weakest point," Bakugo would say. However, before he could utter any other things, Zuko would his hand completely flat, breathing in a deep breath, breathing back out, rushing towards it. Zuko end up saying, "First form, water surface slash." Zuko would say, slashing Bakugo's upper body straight across. as his upper body having blood seep out of the hole, out of the slash Izuku had made. Bakugo would stare over towards Izuku in anger. How dare you! Bakugo would rushing towards Izuku with an explosion, trying to slam it into the side of Izuku's face. However, none of that would work, with Izuku ducking down beneath it, dodging it easily. That's not gonna work on me, Bakugo, Izuku would say before stabbing his hand right into Bakugo, or jumping backwards, lifting his hand over his head. Second form, water wheel, Izuku would say, jumping forward, spinning rapidly, slicing right through Bakugo in a vertical manner, causing Bakugo to be sent flying backwards. Damn it. Kurogiri sent him away. I'm far too weak right now. Must have used too much of my power a week ago during that explosion. Shinobu's parents were quite a hard fight, after all. I must still be recovering, Bakugo would say. Or Kurogiri would end up dropping Izuku back off at the museum. Suzuki would end up holding his head, with a headache. Izuku would be holding his head, end up walking back to wherever the group was, meeting up with Shinobu in the process. Izuku, where were you? I just got lost, that's it, Izuku would say. As the day would end, Izuku and Shinobu would walk back to their house, as Izuku ended up walking into his house as the night would come to an end. However, right as Shinobu was about to go to sleep onto the hard floor once again, Inko would end up bursting in. Shinobu, please, take Izuku's bed. Let damn Izuku sleep on the floor for once. You are a guest after all. As a couple weeks would pass, we see Aizawa walk into the Class 1A classroom. Good morning, class, he would promptly introduce. I would just like to tell you all that we're going to be going on another field trip today, as today is the day before your first hero class, or your first real one, that is. Today we're going to be learning all about the safeties of being a hero, how to rescue someone and what not to do. You have to be intelligent on what you have to do in some scenarios, especially when they're just life and death. So, safety is one of the key factors within being a hero. So that's what we're going to be learning today. So, let's all go down, get on a bus, and we're going to be heading off to a place called the USJ. Aizawa would state, as everyone would nod there, as they would walk down with Aizawa leading them, as they would then get on a bus with Class 1B behind them, as the bus would then speed off towards the USJ. Once everyone would arrive, they would get out of the bus before staring on towards the USJ, as it was just so magnificent. It looked incredible. Many people would end up thinking to themselves, staring up highly in awe at the massive building. As they would be staring up, all of a sudden, 13 would end up appearing out of nowhere. Good morning, classes, she would say. Today we are going to be going into the USJ and learning hero safety. So, let's begin, she would say, walking into the USJ, looking around. As everyone would stare around at the massive building, 13 would then go to take another step forward, about to lead everyone down to show them the different locations. However, before they could do any of that, Izuku would end up staring on towards the middle of the room. As Izuku would be staring on towards the middle of this massive area, all of a sudden a purple portal would end up opening up. As Izuku would end up seeing this, Aizawa and 13's attention would both go ejaculatingly right on towards that portal. What the hell? Aizawa would mutter under his breath, as 13 would be staring on at it too. However, after the portal fully opened, hundreds of villains would pile out of the portal onto the weak Class 1A and B. None of them had had hero training yet, so none of them really knew how to use their quirks to their potential in combat, many of them having just the basic bare minimum level of knowledge to be able to even get in, mostly by just destroying simple mindless robots. Sure, these thugs were just taken right off the street and were practically mindless themselves. However, they were still real people and had more movements. They weren't as robotic and predictable as, say, a robot. So with this, Izuku would reach down to grab onto his sword, as Izuku had started to keep it close to him and bring it every single day to school ever since the first day incident with Bakugo. So Izuku would be holding it all of this, and finally the portal would shut with a blue-haired person leading the back of the army. As Izuku would stare on towards him, Izuku would and this person was most likely their leader. However, before anything else would end up happening, the portal would open once again, revealing a blonde-haired boy, which Izuku would recognize fully. It, of course, was Bakugo Katsuki, who was standing there smiling with a glare on towards Izuku. What was Bakugo doing? Izuku would think. Why is he here attacking this school again? Izuku would think to himself, cracking his knuckles, going to take a step forward, grabbing onto his sword, about to pull it out of its sheath. However, Aizawa would put an arm out in front of him, as if signifying for Izuku to stop. Izuku, stop where you're going. And we have no idea who these people are and what their quirks are. I know you're one of the more advanced students here, but still, I still have to take care of you and protect you all. Can't be having you get injured here now. That's a loss of paycheck, you know. Aizawa would say before jumping down, his scarf flaring up as his quirk was on the ready. As he would do this, the crowd of thugs would jolt forward, going in to attack, with killer instincts activated. However, Aizawa wouldn't let this get to him, easily taking down many of them. As the combat people up that were severely lacking in combat skills would be staring on at the scene unfolding. Many of the UA students would start panicking, especially Class 1B. As Class 1A, yes, they were the stronger students, not necessarily smarter, they were the stronger students, and so they would of course have more confidence in themselves. So seeing thugs, of course, would scare them a little bit. However, the confidence of a hero was still slightly in them, so they would be confident that they could take some of these guys down at least. They would also being trained not to basically look too scared. It was just a random lesson that happened yesterday or the day before, saying if there was ever a villain attack, not to look scared, as that could up the villain you're facing's confidence, which could be a good thing if they got cocky, or if they have a higher confidence, they might just be able to you easier. It's a strange factor, really. As this would be happening, Izuku would shake off Aizawa's words before grabbing down his sword and pulling it out of its sheath. As the rest of the class would stare towards him, Izuku would stare on back towards them as well. What are you guys doing just standing there? Our teacher needs our help, Izuku would say, before jumping down there, his cloak fluttering in the wind. As Shinobu would do the same, getting out her sword, jumping down there as well. As her sword being laced with poison already, Shinobu would land, striking any of the villains around her with a simple flick of the wrist, her wrist fluttering like a butterfly's wing, dancing throughout everyone. She would continue moving quickly, just such soft grace, touching the ground before jumping again, as her sword fluttered in the wind, striking a simple single cut on some people, which would be enough, injecting poison. It wasn't a lethal dose, but it was a dose to put them into a coma for at least a week. So as many of the people getting struck by this would wonder what this girl was doing, as that cut didn't affect them. But after a couple of seconds, many of them would drop to their knees, holding the place where they got cut, as just substance would spread throughout their arm, indicating the poison was spreading throughout their body, causing immense pain and agony throughout these villains. As Shinobu would end up doing this, she would end up taking down a good portion of those villains, as Izuku would get down there as well with his sword in hand. or jumping up, he would yell first form water surface slash, slashing the surface, causing a wave of villains to be taken down. Before Izuku would then raise his hands up into the air, jumping, saying second form, water wheel, spinning rapidly, he would cut down another large group of villains. As Izuku would stop, he would face the now downed army of villains, still staring up at his class that had still remained up there. As Izuku and Shinobu walk over towards Aizawa, Aizawa would glare at them before yelling at them that they should have stayed up there, as it wasn't safe. However, before Aizawa could even finish that sentence, he would be punched in the face by a massive purple bird monster. Good. The Nomu's taking care of it. Alright, Shigaraki. Go get the girl. I'll take out the green-haired one, Bakugo would say, jumping at Izuku, diving towards him with explosions flaring in his hands. As he would slam explosions down into Izuku, Izuku would dodge this easily. When will you learn, Bakugo? Your simple explosion tactics aren't going to be enough to take me down, Izuku would explain. However, Bakugo just didn't care. Rather, he wanted to beat Izuku with every ounce in his body. He hated losing to Izuku, and every time he would fight him, he would lose. And so Bakugo would have this immense hatred within him, never once being able to beat Izuku. So, with this hatred, it would motivate Bakugo to go beyond, further, basically sort of like a plus ultra type deal, lunging at Izuku further every time he would get knocked down by a single strike of Izuku's sword. It was clear Izuku was easily out of Bakugo's level. He was way out of it. However, Bakugo didn't care. He had continued training day in and day out, just hoping to be able to scratch Izuku, so that would even be enough to just satisfy Bakugo for just a little bit. But every day, every hour that went by that Bakugo didn't manage to kill Izuku, it haunted him to his very soul. Cutting back, we see Aizawa's head getting slammed down into the ground. As this would be happening, Shinobu would come out of nowhere, putting her hand back before stabbing the Nomu right in the neck with the point of her sword. It was just like a bee sting, stinging the Nomu right in the neck. However, the Nomu didn't seem to feel pain at all after 10 seconds. After this, the Nomu would reach down towards the blade, gripping it tightly before shattering it with its bare hand. With the shattered blade and steel all scattered deep into the Nomu's knuckles and hand, the Nomu would reach out its hand, slapping Shinobu with this fragments of steel, cutting Shinobu's face. She would be sent flying, slamming into the fountain in the middle of the USJ. Izuku, hearing this, would look back, causing his attention to be turned, as Bakugo would smile, getting deeper down, lunging at Izuku, sending explosions right into Izuku's back, sending him flying into the same fountain as well. As Izuku would slam into the fountain, would see Shinobu losing blood out of her cheek. Izuku would pick her up, setting her out of the water so she didn't drown. As Izuku would see both Bakugo and the Nomu were quickly approaching, as Shigaraki had remained oddly absent from this whole ordeal. Izuku would stare on, losing attention once again. He would see that Shigaraki was busy with a fight against Todoroki. As this would be happening, Izuku would stare down towards Shinobu, who's starting to wake up after being slapped so hard by the Nomu. As Izuku would stare down towards Shinobu, she would finally get up, holding her head in pain, wondering what had just happened. However, before much longer, the Nomu and Bakugo arrived. As Bakugo would jump down, however, he would be pushed aside by the Nomu, punching Izuku right across the face. However, Izuku didn't budge. He was now angry, as Izuku and Shinobu had been friends for quite a while now, and Izuku felt like he had just a duty to protect her. And so when he didn't, it made him angry. He felt like he failed himself. This would cause Izuku to grip his hands, gripping his sword. As his sword would start to shake, Izuku would end up looking up towards the Nomu, gripping his hand. would breathe in once before gripping his sword with two hands, rapidly spinning himself upwards. Sixth form, whirlpool, Izuku would mutter, sending him in a spinning motion. As the Nomu would be sent flying upwards, Izuku would jump upwards with his, and now in the air, the sword blade pointing to the ground, Izuku would stab the Nomu right in the stomach before creating a circle around it, cutting out a circle in the Nomu. However, it wouldn't be enough, as the Nomu would quickly regenerate this. However, the Nomu would then get onto the ground, screaming in anger, rushing towards Izuku. However, Bakugo would put up a hand, signifying for him to stop. "It's alright, Nomu. I've got this one," Bakugo would say, walking towards the weakened Izuku. However, Izuku still wasn't weak enough for Bakugo to beat him. As Bakugo would end up walking towards him, a hand would be placed on his shoulder. "Let's go. I heard from that just half-haired kid. Heroes are on their way, and I think All Might's coming too. I suggest we leave now, Bakugo." "Damn it," Bakugo would mutter before leaving. "Nomu, kill those two, please," Bakugo would say, as the Nomu would then run over towards Izuku, slamming its fist into Izuku, sending him flying back into the fountain. As his head would slam against the wall, Izuku would stare up towards the Nomu. As the Nomu's fist would raise up, there Shinobu would be standing right in front of him, with her sword up in the air. She would slash down onto the Nomu's neck once again, stinging it like a bee. However, it would do nothing, so the Nomu's fist came and slammed down into Shinobu's stomach, sending her flying down, slamming into Izuku as well. Izuku and Shinobu both on top of the fountain ruins. The Nomu stood right over them, ready to attack. Gripping his blade, Izuku jumps into action, jumping back up, dealing through the pain, slashing right down onto the Nomu's neck, knowing that everything he had to go into this slash, because if he didn't, then he was going to die. As Izuku came in, slashing down on the Nomu's neck, his water breathing flowing throughout, as the slash would go, cutting cleanly right through the Nomu. So the Nomu's head would pop clean off. Izuku had managed to decapitate the random monster. However, just immediately the Nomu's head would instantly flow right back to its body, reconnecting. As Izuku would stare on in shock at what was going on before his eyes, he would only shake his head with his sword in hand as his grip lessened. His grip lessening on the sword, dropping it to the floor. He would drop to his knees, holding his head as the Nomu would come rushing towards him. Before quickly, Izuku would swoop up his sword, grabbing it before plunging it into the Nomu's neck. Izuku happened to land on part of the concrete ruins of the fountain. High enough, Izuku plunged the katana's blade right into the Nomu's head. As the Nomu would give off a screech of agony, jumping backwards, holding its brain, as the squishing sound of its brain running around and being heard. Izuku would do this, would pull out his blade before falling back, staring at the Nomu who was screaming in pain. So all of a sudden, All Might would break through the doors, finally here. So you would end up seeing this Nomu going on. He would jump into action, punching the Nomus right in the face, not helping any of the Nomu's troubles. So the Nomu would continue screeching in pain and agony. Izuku would fall backwards once again, just staring up at the sky, breathing heavily. He couldn't believe what he had just done. He had basically just saved himself off of luck. He was thankful, but yet it was just so unreal. As Izuku could be laying there, All Might would defeat the Nomu as the rest of the class who had been scattered throughout the USJ had been picked up by the other heroes of UA that would end up arriving. Once there, they would then transporting them back to UA, where we now end up seeing Izuku walk into class the next day. Alright, I know yesterday was quite the eventful day, but let's get over that by having a little sports festival for everyone. Of course, you all know what this is, the UA Sports Festival. Now, this is just the first sports festival of the year, as we haven't had any hero courses yet, so this is really just an in-house festival. It's not going to be like the major one we end up having at the end of the year. So, why don't we go ahead and begin? Which, it's really just going to be a 1v1 tournament against us in Class 1B. It's really just the last event of the sports festival. As Izuku would hear this, he would end up walking over where we now end up seeing Aizawa standing outside the classroom with everyone else dressed up in their PE uniforms. Alright, let's have the first matchup. Izuku and Uraraka. Let's have you two go up. As Izuku would walk up, he would grip onto his blade as the match would begin. As Uraraka would rush towards Izuku would block it with the tip of his sword before pushing her backwards, kicking her, causing her to lose her balance. As Izuku would lift his sword into the air, saying otter breathing, second form, water wheel, spinning rapidly would cut right through her. Well, not exactly, only cutting her thin enough so it wouldn't kill her, but it would still hurt. As Izuku would end up doing that, it would end up jumping backwards, as Aizawa would look at him to see Uraraka is now on the ground. Aizawa would rush over towards Uraraka and ask if she could continue. Uraraka would shake her head, holding her just stomach in pain, after Izuku had slashed her in that area. After Izuku would end up walking back to watch Shinobu's fight, which happened to be against Tenya Ida. As Izuku would be watching, Shinobu would be holding her sword as the match would begin. Ida would rush at her quickly, however, before he could do anything, she would dodge out of the way before poking him with the tip of her sword. After this, she would continually dodge each of Ida's attacks, as finally after 5 minutes, Ida would start to feel the burn of Shinobu's poison. As the burning continued, Ida would finally fall to his knees, unable to continue with just such the pain of just the poison that Shinobu had done. After this, Izuku would end up acing Mina, as Izuku would crack his fingers as the match would begin. She would slide towards Izuku using her acid, however Izuku would dodge, elbowing her right in the side. Before using his blade, he would end up hitting her with the butt end of it right in the side of the head. She would fall to the ground. Izuku would get over her, putting her head right to the floor. Before looking over to Aizawa, he would call the match, saying that Mina couldn't go on as she was pinned. As Izuku, now in the semi-finals, you would see he was going up someone named Kirishima. After this, Izuku would walk up to just the arena as the match would begin. Kirishima would rush towards Izuku, however Izuku would immediately just dodge this attack. Dodging it, Izuku would slash with his sword, however Kirishima would harden using his quirk as the sword would hit Kirishima's hardened skin, where Izuku would prevail, continuing to push down, applying pressure onto Kirishima's skin, which hadn't been trained to the point that we see the anime Kirishima in just, it hadn't yet been trained to its fullest extent. As Izuku would push down, the hardening would shatter, falling off like rocks. As Kirishima would scream in pain, Izuku would then hit him with the butt end of his sword right in the cheek. As he would fall to the ground, Izuku would be standing over top of him, his sword over his head, about to do something. However, Aizawa would stop the match once again. After that, Izuku would be told he was going to the finals, as the semi-finals of the other match would end up beginning, Shinobu versus Shoto Todoroki. As Izuku would be staring on at the match, Shinobu would be wielding her sword as Todoroki would be staring at her. As the match would begin, Todoroki would glide along his ice, kind of mimicking the movements of Mina, rushing towards Shinobu. However, at the last second, he'd create an ice wall as Shinobu would plunge her sword right into it. As this would be happening, it would shatter after Shinobu would plunge her sword into it, causing her stroke to be slowed. As Todoroki would slide under her sword, grabbing the bottom of her foot, lifting her up before spraying her with a barrage of fire. As her face now charged, she would jump backwards, looking on, rubbing off some of her eyes. After that, Todoroki would appear right in front of her, slamming a fire fist and an ice fist right to the side of each of her, to both sides of her head. Shinobu would walk backwards, not prepared for how Todoroki just went out guns blazing like this, as she would be staring around looking for something that was going to happen, wherever nothing came. Finally, Todoroki would finally prevail right behind her, punching her in the back, causing her to fall over. Todoroki would then close her in ice as she couldn't move, giving Todoroki the victory, causing him to go on to the finals. As Izuku seeing this, Izuku would know that Todoroki was going to be quite the tough opponent. He couldn't let Todoroki win after just causing Shinobu to lose so easily. So after that, Izuku would walk into the arena, staring on towards Todoroki. As Izuku would be staring on towards him, the match would begin as Todoroki would rush towards him, using his ice to glide along, kind of like he was wearing ice skates, but really wasn't. As Todoroki would be coming towards Izuku would dodge Todoroki's iceberg attack before slashing through with such ease and precision, cutting cleanly right through it, almost hitting Todoroki even. Right as Todoroki was about to do anything else, Izuku would end up jumping towards him before gripping his sword again. Third form, flowing dance, Izuku would say, holding his sword, would jump at Todoroki, winding his body, lashing multiple times in a flowing like pattern, slicing through Todoroki. As Todoroki would end up feeling this, the slice would be going right through his gut. However, Aizawa had told Izuku that he could only use shallow cuts. So with that, Izuku really couldn't do much harm to Todoroki. It was really long term with bleeding out. So really just with the pain of that, it was mostly just going to halt a lot of Todoroki's fast movements. However, before anything else could happen, Izuku would end up jumping towards him again. Fourth form, striking tide, Izuku would say, twisting around, jumping with his body, slashing his sword multiple times all around Todoroki. As Todoroki would continuously, all these little cuts would end up appearing to Todoroki's body. So Todoroki would end up looking around, wondering where Izuku had gone. Izuku had used the same strategy that Todoroki had near the end of his and Shinobu's fight. With Izuku now disappearing, Todoroki didn't know where he was. Before he would end up looking up, with Izuku's sword held high in the air, he would yell, second form, water wheel, spinning rapidly, cutting down to the top of Todoroki, cutting right across his forehead and the middle of his nose. So Todoroki would feel this, he would drop to the ground, looking around, as Izuku would then appear right in front of him, punching him before hitting him with the butt end of his sword. As Todoroki would fall to the ground, Izuku would hold his sword right up to Todoroki, as if saying, checkmate. However, Todoroki didn't like this at all, immediately sliding under Izuku right through his legs before going to and fire right out towards him. However, Izuku wasn't there. As Izuku would be right behind Todoroki, Izuku would grab Todoroki by the neck, holding up his katana as he would start to pierce the start of Todoroki's skin. As Todoroki would end up putting his hands up, falling to the ground, he would look angrily on towards Izuku. How could he have lost so easily? How could he have done such bad in such a fight? Todoroki would be thinking to himself, after all that training with father, How could I have lost so easily? I didn't even get to hit hard on him. Todoroki would say, clenching his fists in anger. He felt like he had just disappointed himself. As to be doing that, all of the students would end up walking back. As Izuku noticed there was none of Class 1B, Izuku would ask Aizawa about it, how there was an absence of Class 1B, which Aizawa would end up just shaking his head. Yeah, they actually failed a couple of tests. They all had to redo that. Lucky for you all, you're not failing, or at least most of you. Some of you, who were the absent ones, happened to have to go retake those tests with Class 1, with 1B. So, yeah, can't really do much about it. I thought they'd be coming, but last minute cancellation. So, anyway, class, tomorrow's going to be your first hero training, so prepare. As it's going to be quite the workout, as I would say. Finally, after all that, the students would end up be walking into class the next day. Suzuki would be walking in, he would sit down, as Aizawa would end up walking in with All Might right behind them. Good morning, class, both of them would say simultaneously. Today we're gonna begin your hero training. So, why don't we begin? All of you versus me. It's going to be quite the interesting fight, don't you think? All Might would say, cracking his fists before cracking his neck. What? Some kids would say, as All Might would only just laugh. Into the courtyard now. I can't wait to see how strong some of you are. I saw All Might would say, smiling on towards them. As they would then go put their PE uniforms on, All Might would be standing across from them in the dirt patch. As the match would begin, All Might would rush in with his fists flowing like the wind, as his punch would come hurtling down onto Class 1A. As All Might's fist was flailing on towards Class 1A, all of a sudden he would plant his foot before saying fourth form, blooming flame, as fire would come out of nowhere, spinning in a circle, as All Might used his hand to use this in a circular motion, as all of a sudden Tezuka would appear out of nowhere, slashing down with his sword, however it would be blocked by this fourth form. As Tezuka would jump back, he would look on in surprise. Ah, All Might, I didn't know you had a breathing style, Izuku would say, as All Might would only laugh. I'm the #1 hero, of course, what do you expect? I've been training with it for around 5 years now. As I'm getting older, I'm gonna have to be using more ways to be more powerful to take down some of these newer, younger villains. I see you have a breathing style too, Izuku. It's something I noticed and told to Nezu from the very first day of school. Same with you, Shinobu, All Might would say. However, after he would finish his sentence, he would rush towards Izuku, his hand up. However, he would reach towards his back, pulling out a massive katana, 5th form, Flame Tiger. He would say, slashing a bunch of times. Izuku's eyes would end up widening as a Flame Tiger would, out of nowhere, eating and devouring Izuku. So he'd be sent flying backwards, since his guard was down, right into a dumpster. So he would slam down into it, the lid would close on top of him. Izuku would be there, all of a sudden, Might would rush towards Shinobu, grabbing her by the head and throwing her over to a dumpster next to Izuku. She would land in it as well. As all of the students would be taken aback by this, all of a sudden Todoroki would slam his foot down, causing ice to rupture the ground, spiraling on towards All Might. As this would be happening, all of this, and All Might would shatter the ice. However, a flame attack would appear right behind him. As All Might would see this, he would turn his head before violently planting his foot, launching himself forward, right past Todoroki. First form, unknowing fire, All Might would say, slashing with his katana right down towards the back of Todoroki's neck. However, it was a weak slash as to not hurt Todoroki. As it would hit the back of Todoroki's neck, his head would violently jerk back before he would fall down to the ground, completely unconscious. As Todoroki falling onto the ground, All Might would look around, looking for the rest of the class. However, they had all ran just wondering where they could hide, as All Might had just given them the boundaries, being the local forest around them, and All Might had to hunt them down to go find them. However, before All Might could do any of that, Izuku would end up appearing out of the dumpster along with Shinobu, with both of their katanas in hand. "I'm not gonna go down that easily," Izuku would say, sprinting towards All Might. However, All Might would reach down, grabbing dirt, throwing it into both Izuku and Shinobu's faces. As All Might did this, he would then run away right back into the forest, where he would then hunt down, one by one, each one of Izuku's classmates, going down, picking them off with ease. Every time up finding one, would knock them out cleanly. As this would be happening, Izuku and Shinobu would look throughout the forest, wondering where that All Might had just happened to go. It was quite the elusive one, and they were pretty much just wandering around at this point. The forest was quite big after all. It wasn't massive, but it was quite huge. So with that, they would continue on looking as All Might would find Mina, find Kaminari, find Kirishima, find Momo, find Mineta, as he would hunt each one of them down, easily taking them out, as he had easily taken out Todoroki, and he was one of the best kids in the class in terms of strength-wise. So it really just shows how much leaps and bounds All Might is ahead of everyone else. So as this would be happening, All Might would be rushing around looking for anything else he could do. However, he would then end up realizing he had captured all of the other students and placed them back where Todoroki was. And since he had done this, he would go back to the middle, waiting for the last two to finally show up, both Shinobu and Izuku. As All Might would be waiting, the two would end up walking in, as All Might would end up smiling. "Good. You two finally arrived. I've been waiting for you," All Might would say with a smile and smirk on his face, as Izuku and Shinobu would both look at him, before both of them would jump 20 feet apart, with each of their swords gripped tightly in their hands. They would walk in circles around All Might, making sure not to bump into each other, making sure that he basically knew he was stuck, he was cornered, he wasn't going to be able to get out of there. However, All Might didn't really care what they were going to do. All Might knew he was going to easily be able to beat them. So, as Izuku charged, All Might would charge as well. As All Might would end up staring on, looking towards Izuku, he would end up putting his katana into the air, as he would end up saying "third form, blazing universe," he would say, as he would slash his sword right down onto Izuku. However, Izuku would dodge this, sliding under, slashing the leg of All Might, causing All Might to recoil a little bit, reaching down to grab his leg. Right as he would do this, he would end up feeling a presence from above him, as Shinobu would appear right above him, with her sword flailing, spinning in her hand, before she would end up jabbing on towards All Might, who would narrowly miss it, very tinily getting cut right by her blade, as All Might would end up jumping, diving backwards, before catching his breath. "Whew, you two are quite the fast ones. Especially you. Quite the elusive one you are, Izuku," All Might would say, eyeing him, making sure not to lose his sight on Shinobu either. As both of them would start inching closer and closer towards All Might would finally make his move of his own, as he would rush towards Izuku, punching him with his massive strength quirk, easily overpowering Izuku. Although All for All was nothing what it once was, it was still insanely powerful. So as All Might would punch him, he would send Izuku flying into the trees, before All Might would end up blocking one of Shinobu's attacks, or he would end up dueling her with his katana, as Shinobu was a better katana wielder. She was a better swordsman, swordswoman, whatever you want to call her. She was the better swordsperson, and All Might knew this. However, his sheer strength from One for All clearly made the match just outmatched. Shinobu was nowhere near All Might's strength, and it showed throughout the fight. So with this, All Might would have enough of playing with food and would easily take down Shinobu, punching her right to the ground, knocking her out instantly. After this, everyone would be transported to Recovery Girl's office, where they would then just be made sure they were okay, didn't have any injuries, before they would end up going home. We now cut forward a massive time leap, 5 months, with All Might training all of the students every single day, just making sure that they were the strongest they absolutely could be, making sure that every day they were going home just tired and barely could move. And so another big move by UA was the building of dorms. After 2 attacks on one of the first months of school, Nezu finally just decided it's probably safer just to put dorms on campus and up security, and so that would end up happening. Since they are now halfway into the school year, it would finally end up being time to take UA internships. Now, there was going to be multiple internships throughout the year. These were the pre-internships where they wouldn't really go out to fight villains all too much. They were really just going to be staying on the sidelines with a clipboard and pen and paper. They were going to be watching, learning with experience. However, they are going to be there, so they have to know some of the safety regarding that, even though they still are going to be there, and depending on who they internship with is going to let them fight or not. And so in one of UA's gyms, an internship just thing would end up being held, where the students of Class 1A get to go around showing off their different types of quirks and abilities, just to show the people that might be wanting to contact them with an internship know exactly what these people's powers just happen to be. So as Izuku would go around showing his water breathing, showing a couple of moves, as Shinobu would do the same, they would end up getting an invite from All Might's agency, who wasn't there. Really, it was only a private invite, as All Might wanted to train them even more in the art of breathing. Even though Izuku and Shinobu both had been learning breathing for longer than All Might, having done it when he was older and a lot stronger, had gotten more progress very quickly, easily catching up to their level of experience, since both of them had started training when they were a lot younger. So with that, we now end up seeing both Izuku and Shinobu walking into All Might's agency. Good morning, you two. It's nice to meet you. So, today we're going to be just learning some of the basic safeties that you're going to have during this internship. If you see a villain, I'm not saying don't fight it, but if you end up breaking away from me and you don't think you can just take down this villain on your own, run. There's no harm in being cowardly, as your own safety is very much important to me. Unless you feel otherwise, if multiple civilians are possibly going to get killed if you happen to run away, that's really your choice to call, as it's really going to be up to the moment for you. So, anyways, now the basic safety is out of the way, we can now begin with this internship. So, let's begin with training. For the next couple of days, we'll just have some basic sparring. Hold on, All Might, I happen to overhear you, someone would say from around the corner, walking. It was one of All Might's supervisors that had been there. You gotta make sure you have to tell them all of the safety rules. You're never a good teacher. So, kids, safety rules. If you get injured, that's fine. We'll take care of all of the hospital bills, since it's our responsibility to take care of you for the next week. However, if you do end up breaking away from All Might, we really wouldn't like that to happen, so stay as close to All Might as possible, unless he gives the go-ahead that you can break away and go fight villains on your own. However, I really don't see that happening. As we now cut to see Asuka and Shinobu both sparring All Might in the All Might's agency gym, as they would be sparring using their breathing styles, but mostly their katanas, as All Might wouldn't be allowed to use their quirk, since the other two were quirkless as well. So, with both of them sparring with each other, All Might would continually be outmatched by both of the two who had been training in katana combat since their very, very early age. So it was really just unfair for All Might at that point. He really had no chance of winning. He was facing up against pretty much two masters of sword wielding, and he really couldn't use his quirk to give him an advantage. Well, he was also going up against 2-on-1 as well, for a little bit of All Might's credit. We now end up cutting back to remember that supervisor of All Might that said he didn't see All Might giving the go-ahead for both Shinobu and Asuka, who go off and run off on their own, finding some villains. However, All Might had deemed them ready, as we now see All Might just relaxedly saying, "Yeah, you two can go fight villains for the next couple of hours, as I gotta recover from today's training that I did. I'll see you guys in an hour or so, I guess," All Might would say, as we end up seeing Zuko and Shinobu both running into the city, looking for any villains they could stop. However, all of a sudden, they would end up hearing a scream from an alleyway, so both Shinobu would take a violent, screeching halt, staring into the alleyway they were both right in front of. As all of a sudden a red glowing eye would peer over, staring, glaring at them with a murderous look. The murderous eye would stare on towards Zuko and Shinobu, or they would end up turning towards both of them. "Ah, Izuku, Shinobu. It's nice meeting both of you here once again." A familiar voice would echo throughout the alleyway. As Izuku's ears would be pierced by the familiar noise, Izuku would realize just who it was. "Bakugo! What are you doing here?" Izuku would say with a striking voice, as Bakugo would only give a bloody smile. "It doesn't matter right now, Izuku. All that matters is today's finally going to be the day you die. See, I knew you were going to be here. I predicted it, you could say. I also knew Shinobu was going to be here, and I know today's going to be the last day you two are living together." So, Bakugo would say as Izuku would grip his sword tightly, pulling it out of its sheath, as Shinobu would do the same. Whoa, calm down. No need to get all feisty now with me, now do we? See, that wouldn't be very nice of you, now would it? You see, I just really would like to see both of you die. Okay, yeah, I know you want to see me die too, but the thing of the matter is, I've gotten a couple, enhancements to my quirk, which basically make it so I can't lose to you. It's quite the possibility that both of you will die, and the smaller possibility one of you will escape within inches of death. So, I guess it's up to you to decide which ones you want. So, why don't we begin? Bakugo would say, widening his arms, showing his full body, revealing that he had at least gained 50 pounds of pure muscle since then, which it had only been like a month since they last saw each other. This just didn't look natural at all. As Izuku would be staring at Bakugo, would end up wondering, what was the point of this? How did he gain such muscle so quickly? Was he using some sort of enhancement like steroids? Zuko would question himself, but it didn't matter as Bakugo would lunge right on towards both of them, slamming an explosion right into him and Shinobu's face, sending them flying backwards. Zuko and Shinobu would both slam back to a wall behind them. "Ugh, my head," Zuko would mutter to himself, as Bakugo would be staring on towards Zuko and Shinobu. "Oh, come on, you little weaklings. Is that all you got? Come face me already," it would say as Zuko and Shinobu would both rush on towards Bakugo, just running on towards him, as both of their swords would flail in the air, as both of them would seem to move seamlessly and symmetrical to one another, as Bakugo would, however, continue easily dodging each of these attacks. You guys are so weak. This is just too easy for me," Bakugo would say before slamming a backhand into the side of Shinobu's face, before with his open palm slamming an explosion into the other side of Izuku's face. As both of them would be lying on the ground, Izuku would get up holding his head with a daze, gripping his sword once again, water breathing. Before he could finish, Bakugo would run right towards him, tackling to the floor, punching him continuously right in the head. Shinobu would end up getting up before twirling her sword around, stabbing Bakugo right in the side of the chest. As Bakugo, however, would get up, nearly just yanking the sword out of his body. "That's not going to be enough this time, Shinobu," Bakugo would say as blood would start filling up in Bakugo's mouth. His teeth started to be stained red. "You see, I've changed for the better. So your simple tricks that have worked on me before isn't going to work on me again," Bakugo would say with his voice deepening with sort of a hint of anger to it. As we now end up seeing Bakugo rush right on towards Izuku and Shinobu once again, as he would end up punching Shinobu right in the neck. He would be sent flying backwards, start to hold her neck, choking out small just levels of air into her lungs. As Izuku would get up, now gripping his blade even tighter, in just a wave of fury, he would rush on to Bakugo, launching his sword flying in the air, stabbing into Bakugo's side, before Bakugo would pull the sword out once again. As Bakugo's wounds weren't healing, they were rather just there. So Bakugo must have had, or whatever the things he was taking must have been affecting his pain receptors, causing him to feel little to no pain at all. That's why he's being able to do something, being able to just take such high-powered hits, especially in such cognitive areas, like right by the shoulder or right in the stomach where tons of organs are. As Bakugo would be doing this, however, since he couldn't feel pain, he wouldn't be feeling it, the levels of toxins that were roaming in his body and bloodstream, as they would continuously start searching for even more blood to take over. As this blood would end up just rushing throughout Bakugo, as he would end up just smiling, thinking that he had won. It was clear both Izuku and Shinobu, they couldn't take him. It was obvious, even on 2-on-1, they weren't going to be able to defeat him, with the absence of his pain receptors and him being 50 pounds heavier of pure muscle. There really wasn't a chance for either of the two to take down just the Hulk that was Bakugo. So as Bakugo would be standing over both of them, he would end up sending more explosions into both of them as well. As he's sending all of these explosions into them, both of them would get some pretty serious injuries, some broken, just fractured, cracked ribs, broken arm, leg, or limb or two, and even more injuries, fractures, and other things like that. As with these high-powered explosions, Bakugo would end up getting up once again, as with the adrenaline still running through both Izuku and Shinobu's veins, they would barely manage to stand up once again, with their legs just on the floor, barely able to hold each of them up. The numb, succumbing feeling would start to go over them. However, they knew they couldn't shut their eyes, as that would probably be the end of it if they were to do so. As both of them would be holding it there, they knew society didn't have a chance to remain the way it was if Bakugo were to continue living, and so they had only one other option. As Izuku would hold his sword, staring on towards Bakugo's neck, as his eyes would be fixated on it, Bakugo would pick up on this, as Izuku would rush towards him. Water breathing. First form, Izuku would say, jumping into the air, his sword by his side about to slash. However, before he would do so, Izuku would feel a punch of the fist go right into his stomach. As Izuku, smiling, end up coughing out a couple of drops of blood before falling to the floor, as there Shinobu stood with her sword right in the stomach of Bakugo, right through his major organs, as she had done it from low, causing her sword to go upwards, piercing through some of Bakugo's major organs and then piercing the bottom of Bakugo's heart. As Bakugo would fall to the floor, as the poison would start finally just taking hold of Bakugo, and to the injury to his heart, Bakugo would start a slow, painful death of bleeding out. As Bakugo would be holding on to himself, feeling absolutely no pain at all. However, his body, while yes, he couldn't feel the pain, it was just hurting. It was in so much tremendous pain that he couldn't move. It was just so incredible. As Bakugo would be lying limp there, he'd be yelling at himself, "Come on! Get up!" He would be telling himself, but no, his body wouldn't get up at all. It just didn't want to. It couldn't, rather. As he would be yelling for it to get up, finally, after moments, his body would finally go numb, as his eyes would roll back, as he would end up dying, succumbing to his injuries. As sirens would end up being heard as bystanders called the police passing by it, as police and ambulances would end up arriving, taking away the two young people off to UA Hospital, where All Might would end up just be shaking his head, angry at himself. Should have been there! Be telling himself over and over again, and that these injuries were his own fault. He should have been there helping his own students, but yet he wasn't at all. He wasn't there helping them. He wasn't there just doing anything to help get them safe, keep them safe, and now they were both injured. We cut forward 2 months in the passing of the UA Sports Festival, as we end up seeing the recovery of both Izuku and Shinobu. However, it was summer break, and they had 3 or 4 months off of school, so they decided to use this to just train and get better, living off of the wilderness for 4 straight months, not going anywhere. They're living off the beasts of the land with only their katanas. This would help them get just more stamina, recovering better on their injuries, regaining their stamina that they lost and even gaining more, getting stronger, getting more lean, allowing for them to be more flexible, be able to not be bulky, or for allowing for them to be faster. As when the second year of UA started, they would be the top of the class, which many would have not predicted because of their injury at close to the end of the year. And with them at the top of the class, they would end up easily passing through the second year and then the third year, with just a small lingering problem of the League of Villains. However, with the leader of it, Bakugo Katsuki, now dead because of Izuku Shinobu, the dead All For One and Shigaraki both having died by the hands of Bakugo in a prior incident due to the substances that Bakugo had been taking, As both All For One and Shigaraki both no longer around, the League of Villains would fade into obscurity, as Izuku and Shinobu would both end up becoming great heroes. However, they would never reach the ranks of top 10 or top 20 even. Yes, they might have captured more villains than thus the likes of All Might or Endeavor. However, they really focused on more just far out locations. They weren't ranked heroes, as they went for a more just Aizawa type approach, keeping it more secretive and just sort of as a secret agency, allowing for them to use their quirks in a similar way, as really wasn't much different ways they could use a katana, and so anyone who knew basic or advanced katana skills would basically be able to keep up with them easily by dodging some of the easy maneuvers. Although, yes, both Izuku and Shinobu, both smart and advanced in the ways of the katana, they both just wanted to keep things secretive, which would also allow for them to have a peaceful life, not living the likes of the media. And so they would continue up in the mountains, where eventually Shinobu and Izuku would both end up getting together, getting married, and having a happy family, which would be taught with just water breathing and just insect breathing as well. So that would be where the story would come to an end. Izuku and Shinobu, both some of the best heroes of all time, and when they would retire, they would go into a sort of hero hall of fame, which would shock many people when they were announced, as many people hadn't heard of them, and very few action figures were ever created of these two, as they were kind of seen as saviors of just the lost cities that were mostly abandoned or lived in the poorest areas, causing for most people that lived in richer sides of a city wouldn't really know who they were. And that is where What If Deku Had Water Breathing, the movie, comes to an end. I hope you all did enjoy this series, and if you did, please consider subscribing, as it really does help this channel out, and you can even be notified when the other parts of this series do end up coming out. I thank you all for watching once again, and goodbye.